everyone, and welcome to our OIXIO Threat Briefing webinar. If you operate or have secure networks that are connected to physical systems, this can help you understand the landscape and what kind of threats are facing us. And I am happy to have Dragos with us today. They are truly professionals at what they do. They are specialized in OT networks, to do architecture, incident response. They have technology to protect these systems, and also, interestingly, the world's largest threat intelligence team that is specialized in operational environments. And we have Olli Herterich from Dragos today with us, who will be talking about the landscape globally and in Europe also specifically. He's an associate principal solutions architect at Dragos, and from what I understand, that's not all you do is architecture, but you also do incident response. And maybe now I would hand it over to you, Olli. Tell us a little bit what you do and can go from there.
Yes. So, welcome everybody. Glad to have you here. Basically, Ef already told you, I'm a solution architect, which is kind of a sales engineer, but in Dragos, I have multiple roles. So I'm also working in the incident response part. So if there is some network incident response or network threat hunting needed, I often help our internal teams. And additionally, I do threat hunting at the CR14 events. So, for example, cross shields, cross swords. And last year in the partner run, we had a Dragos team. So I was the blue team lead for the Dragos Lock Shields partner run team. And next year we will most likely compete with SANS together in a team and support them using the Dragos infrastructure. So, that being said, I'm quickly sharing the presentation. First of all, what is this about today? What I basically want to talk about today is the cybersecurity threat landscape for OT. We will cover a lot of things that you will also find in our year in review report. The year in review is basically an open source intelligence source we always publish in the beginning of the year. So as you can see, it's the 9th annual report. It's definitely worth a look. It's got about 80 pages, and we are like disclosing a lot of information that was formerly only accessible from our customers. Talking about customers, who is Dragos? Just one slide. We are currently more than 600 employees, and we have employees in 28 different countries, basically all over the world. You can see it on the bottom. So, of course, US, Canada, we have Australia with the Gulf Coast. We're in UK and Europe, obviously, since I'm based in Germany, but also Singapore and Japan. India is just like in the building. So what we do is, for a lot of customers in the OT space, we do not only provide them with the software, which is called the Dragos platform, but we also do incident response for them. And basically, that is one part of the sources we have. Just to give you some insights, the incident in Poland earlier this year, our guys did, together with the guys from Hitachi, they did the incident response there. So enough about this. Let's start with the threat landscape. What can we see about the recent years? So first of all, of course, what is notable and what is visible, the threat landscape is increasing. So basically, when you look to the left, until 2008, there was not much going on. 2009, there was a test from the US government or US government agencies if they could disrupt automation and destroy automation, basically utility grid, by using code. This was called Project Aurora, and this was I would say the first test, the first known test at least, on how to interfere with OT systems from a cyber perspective. Then, of course, one thing we all know, which basically opened the box of the Pandora, Stuxnet, the attack on the Iranian centrifuges, and from there it went straight on basically to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the first conflict of them, basically with Crash Override, which was a ICS malware targeting the utility grid. Then we had a pipeline attack in Saudi, which was noted as the first attack that actually targeted human life. So not only putting down an energy grid, but also like having an impact on the people working in the close to the pipeline. And if we look at the last, I would say 4 to 5 years, we see it more and more increasing. Currently, we are tracking 26 threat groups. We have a lot of new ICS malware that was published or that was used in the last years. We saw a reuse of existing malware, for example, in Ukraine, and a lot of attacks against water, wastewater, pipelines, manufacturing companies, basically the whole source. If we look at the threat groups, by the way, they are just like ordered when we discovered them or when we made them public. In 2025, we had 3 new threat groups, which is actually not fully true, because that is only the threat groups we assign that are state-sponsored or state actor groups. So just if you're confused by the naming, every Intel company has its own naming. What do? We name them after very rare minerals used in production, sometimes even fake names, but that's just how we do it. Just to give you an example, CrowdStrike and others named the threat group that was targeting the Ukraine Sandworm or APT44. We actually have 2 threat groups for that. We have Camacide, which is this one here. Oop, let me just enable the laser pointer, which is this one. And we have Electrum, which is this one. Why do we have 2 threat groups? Well, we are narrowing down to different teams in a threat organization. Basically, Camacide is responsible for initial access, movement through the IT, and then handing over that access to Electrum, which is actually doing the OT part and the OT impact. A few seconds ago, I said this is actually not true because we're tracking way more. If we take into consideration, there's not only APTs, so the advanced persistence threats, we also have TATs, which is a temporary activity threat. Just to give you an example, most of the hacktivist groups fall in the category of temporary activity threat. So if we look at the different threat actors, and we will discuss the hacktivists, the ransomware groups, and the threat group operations in this meeting. Looking at this, we have 4 different types of threats. We have the basically random destructive cyber attacks, which is like not too important, not very common, and not very sophisticated. The second part is we have the hacktivist groups. They are actually starting to get a real threat. The ransomware groups, of course, for ransomware groups, the whole stuff is more like a business case. So they don't necessarily want to disrupt your operation just to gain a political advance. They're doing that basically for money. And then, of course, which is the biggest threat, we have these state actors, these state-sponsored groups. And what we've seen is with the geopolitical tension we currently have, we saw these, I would say, conflict-driven attacks. We saw them more and more. Just to give you an example, of course, electric basically is the most targeted sector by our state actor groups. The second biggest is defense. Thing is, what is defense? Defense can also be supply chain for defense. So if you're a steel plant and you're making steel for defense companies, then you are counted as a defense or a supply chain defense company. Basically, that's what we saw. A lot of threat actors are not aiming at the big ones like Hensoldt, like Rheinmetall. They are also aiming on the smaller companies, most likely not that much protected companies, for the supply chain. So just for you, take a look at your company and say, hey, is there an area where we are actually in the supply chain for a defense company? If so, think about a bit of extra protection here, please. Why is a cyber attack very common together with a kinetic attack, like rockets or airstrikes or whatever? Well, first of all, interrupting communications. If you shut down the utilities, we've seen that in Venezuela. If you shut down the communications and the electricity, it is very hard to respond to the kinetic attack. So we've seen in Venezuela that the air defense systems were turned off and everything. And my personal view, and that's my personal view here, I think based on the reports we got, cyber was involved in Venezuela as well. Then of course you have a lot of psychological impacts. So we've seen that more and more in Ukraine. They attacked the heating, they attacked the energy grids, basically everything that the civilization is relying on. And of course, this has a major psychological impact. And last but not least, of course, a lot of things we are seeing currently, even in Germany, is they're testing the defensive capabilities, especially in the cyberspace. So we have seen attacks that are basically just a kind of a test run. It's like what will work, what works, and how do the responders act to that. If we go to the general trends, just overall, we have seen a lot of new ICS malware. So the adversaries grow knowledge in the OT space. And as we all know, OT protocols and OT systems are meant to automate things, not necessarily to be secure. So they're using malware, communicating in native protocols to do an actual physical impact. Second thing, which is like, for me, it's the worst, internet accessible OT devices. There is a separate slide for that, but just to say, well, accessing your PLC or connecting your PLC directly to the internet is never a good idea. We have seen that in Norway, the attack on the dam. This was not a sophisticated cyber attack. That was just a PLC which was like directly connected to the internet with very weak credentials. So that is, of course, one big thing you should avoid. Secondly, of course, thirdly, remote access. The adversaries are targeting everything like VPNs, SSH, openly communicated. We've seen a lot of OT devices that can be accessed via the internet with default credentials. Actually, you can try yourself, go to Shodan and look for example, Modbus devices. A lot of them will have default credentials. And what we've seen more and more is third-party remote access. So the adversaries are actually targeting system integrators, maintenance workers, whatever, to get access to your plant. The difficult thing here is these suppliers are mostly not coming through your IT network. So in most of the bigger companies, the IT is very, very good protected. But these third-party suppliers very often have remote access directly into the OT. Thing is, can be a 4G modem, 5G modem. It can be some kind of other cell access. If an adversary can take over a small company that's, for example, building and maintaining machines, they are directly in your OT. If you're not monitoring the OT network, will not find them, and that makes it very easy for the adversary to, well, basically spread after the initial compromise. What we've seen, the adversaries are no longer, I would say, using too much IT tools. They're most likely using living off the land techniques. So basically, they're using stuff that's already available on the workstations they overtook. Problem is with living off the land, this is very, very hard to find. Just to give you an example, we've seen a threat group called VoltSide. What they've done is, after the initial compromise and the initial persistence, they just opened a Firefox browser on the workstation and tried to access devices via HTTP. Thing is, they went into full stealth mode. So basically, they tried 2 IP addresses, which is like nothing. Thing is, this is really, really hard to detect automatically. That's where the threat hunters come in and say, hey, we've seen that. That does not look very nice. Let's do some investigation on that host. Overall, just for you, keep in mind, more and more malware. Don't put your OT devices on the internet, and secure your remote access for everything, not just like have a concept in your shelf. Make sure it's also like the secure remote access is also in the OT and for your suppliers. And of course, do some manual threat hunting, I would say, stating, hey, is that device really meant to do that? Let's go over to the threat groups. We've discovered 3 new ones this year or last year. The first one is a Silver Knight. Silver Knight is basically the initial access team for VoltSide, which you might also know as Volt Typhoon. And they are basically targeting vulnerabilities in remote access devices or systems. So we've seen them go for Ivanti, we've seen them go for F5s. Basically, if a vulnerability is disclosed, it took them on average 48 hours to exploit the vulnerability and get access. If they have access, what do? They try to exfiltrate Active Directory credentials, and then, of course, if the access is done, they hand over to VoltSide, and VoltSide then does the deeper intrusion for them. They are not really limited to a sector. They're working basically in the electric power. They do water, oil, gas, manufacturing, public companies as well. So why do they do that? Just some insights. If you're in the military, your boss walks in the door and says, hey, I would love to target XYZ. It's better to have access than to, well, take an extra 3 months to get access. So what we've seen a lot of these initial access groups, what they do is try to get in as much companies as they can, stay there hidden. So in case they need access, in case there is an operation, they don't need to start, they can just hand over the access basically and say, hey, yep, we're there, you can go. just for Silvernight, what we know, these are basically the biggest campaigns they ran, and as you can see, mostly Ivanti F5s and the NetWeaver. The problem is most of the vulnerabilities, since they're always targeting vulnerable devices. What we found was 26 of these vulnerability advisories had no patch when they were made public. So, given the combination that, well, yeah, a quarter had no patches, and it takes Silvernight to exploit a vulnerability for around 48 hours, this is very dangerous. What you can do, what you should do, look in the vulnerability advisories, especially for remote access or internet-facing devices. Look for mitigations. Very often, there's no patch, but you can have, well, at least do some mitigations around it and decrease the chance of it being exploited. Next thing, that's something what we do basically on a daily basis. If we disclose vulnerabilities, or if we get vulnerabilities from vendors, we do proof of concepts. We check how can this vulnerability be mitigated, especially if there's no patch attached, and especially if there's an external facing system. So, Silvernight, as I said, is the initial access group for VaultSite, which is, of course, an update to the VaultSite group. VaultSite was found 3 years ago, I think. We had them in a lot of our customers. The biggest issue with VaultSite, in my view, is that VaultSite goes into very strategic places. Just to give you an example, this is, by the way, this is not disclosed. This is open information. VaultSite targeted a substation in the US, a very small regional substation. So normally not of interest, but with the background knowledge that this substation was responsible for an army base, and this army base was responsible for basically shifting the troops from the US to Europe, it gets a bit of a, well, yeah, very strategic, very problematic notion. Thing is, they were in this substation, they did not do an impact. So currently what we see them doing is get persistence in the OT space, extract as much information as they can. So SCADA configurations, project files, whatever, so that they really understand how this plant or this substation or whatever, they really understand how that works. Because of course, that's why we see or have not seen too much OT attacks in the past. If you want to do a physical impact on OT systems, you first have to understand how that works. Basically, every OT system is kind of unique. So between the initial compromise and the actual OT attack that is causing a physical impact, there is some time. It's not that you say, hey, it's a Hollywood film, basically somebody's hacking in and 5 minutes later the power goes down. That's not how OT cyber works. So for VaultSite, they're extremely dangerous, but since they're currently mostly exfiltrating information, you have time to find them. They're using living of the land techniques. So what we saw is really helpful is to do manual threat hunts, especially on the most critical systems. Ask your automation guys, they know what is a critical system there. So mainly talk to your OT guys, say, hey, if we want to destroy X, Y, Z, what would we need to do? They know that, and then go after these devices to find out if somebody's already there and preparing for an attack maybe. Another group we have observed is Azurite. They are basically, well, they're quite similar to Silvernight. Different infrastructure, different tools. So for us, a different group. What do? They do compromise small office and home office routers, so-called SOHO routers. And with that, they build a proxy infrastructure. Problem is they're trying to access engineering workstations. Same, basically, they're exfiltrating informations, network diagrams, operational data, project files, SCADA files, and maintain the access. The targets here, manufacturing defense, which is like 80% of where we saw them, a bit less in automotive, electric, and the government stuff. So as you can see, they are all kind of going into the OT, extracting information to then later maybe make an impact. An interesting group we've seen is Pyrocene. They do it a bit different. Pyrocene is using a lot of social engineering. So what they do, they create LinkedIn profiles, fake LinkedIn profiles, poses recruiters, try to get credentials, and use these credentials to access then Citrix or BM systems. And they are actually moving through the IT into the OT. We've seen them targeting a lot of aerospace aviation companies, but yeah, logistics, transportation in general. By the way, just to jump in, you see these threat groups, and I know a lot of intelligence companies like to attribute. So this is this country, this is this country, this is this country. Generally, we at Dragos don't do that. Two reasons for that. Firstly, you can never be sure. Of course, everybody's using like VPNs, Tor, whatever. Secondly, does that really help for your defense? In the end, we say no. Basically, the attack is the same attack if it comes from China or Iran. It does not make much difference for the defense. That's why we're not attributing. Well, as long as no state agency says, hey, this is this. Now let's get to the familiar guys. What have we observed from the existing threat groups? Chemicide, for me, one of the dangerous threat groups we currently have. They were responsible for initial access operations in the Ukraine 10 years ago. And now we've seen them over the last year shifting their focus away from the Ukraine and shifting into Europe and the US. So we've seen active campaigns there trying to access like European and US-based companies. Why are they so dangerous? Well, basically they trained for 10 years in Ukraine, which was a massive playground for them. And now they're using that knowledge to attack other countries and other regions. What we've seen is in the last campaigns, for example, the US campaign, they are systematically targeting everything in the operational workflow. So they go for HMIs, they go for VFDs, any kind of meters, and of course the remote access gateways. And what they do is they sometimes just dump configs just to see when the process stops. That's a very important information for them, because that is actually like, hey, how can I get this device in a failure state? What is the process stop trigger? By the way, Azurite does quite the same. They exfiltrate alarm data to see the operational boundaries. And that is, like, I would say, the biggest shift now from attacks we've seen in the past. The adversaries overall, no matter which, most of the groups, they are mapping the entire control loop to use that for future attacks. Very similar to that, and we assign also, it was Camerside together with Electrum, we see them later, was the attack that was done in Poland. There are 2 reports available of that. First of all, there's the Dragos report. That is in the ClearNet, so you can find it on dragos.com. But the way better report is the report of the CERT in Poland. Why? Because we only did incident response in a part of it. So we just did it basically for the Hitachi stuff. The CERT in Poland disclosed the report, well, way more open. The problem always with these ClearNet reports is it's sometimes very hard for us to say, okay, are we allowed to say that or not? That is why the Polish report is more extensive, bigger, and gives a bit of a better overview. What happened in Poland? Yeah, basically they attacked the decentralized energy grid, everything which is like wind, solar dispatch systems. They disabled the communications. That's also where the incident response started. They had access to the operational systems, but they did not make an impact. Which is interesting, because as both us and the Polish CERT say, hey, they would have a chance to do a physical impact. Would not be a nationwide impact, but a regional impact would have been there. Why was it not that dangerous? Well, in Poland, the renewables is only like 25% of the overall energy generation. So taking these out, or taking these systems out, would have had a regional impact, but would not destabilize the country or the European grid. So it was dangerous. There was no outage, though the customers had access to these systems. Overall, we attribute this attack to Electrum. Why? Just because of the tools and the tactics they used. So we've seen a lot of tools that are quite common to Electrum, and as you see in this slide, they are specifically going for electric companies. They are pretty specialized in doing physical disruptions of electrical grids, and of course, additionally, they have multiple different wiper malwares they are using. They are trying to destroy the master boot record, the NTFS metadata, and the volumes. Why? Shutting down a power grid is, I would say, not too complicated. Shutting it down for longer than an hour, that's where it gets hard. So that's why they basically, in combination with the OT attack, they deploy their wiper malware, because of course, then you have to like rebuild it from scratch. Or hey, put in backups if you have. We also saw them doing a lot of destructive operations against service providers in the Ukraine. Therefore, they have not only used, I would say, the official infrastructure. They impersonated a hacktivist group or a hacktivist persona called Solnsevak. yeah, that's one of the activist groups we can actually at least say is linked to one of the state actor groups. There's a slide for that later. And what they've done over the last, I would say, 10 years, they have developed very destructive wiper variants, and they have a very nice toolkit. They are more and more, I would say, improving. So they are also very, very dangerous when it comes to the electric grid. Just a short overview. This is not a full overview. That were the most important attacks from Electrum. December 2015, there was a coordinated attack on 3 Ukrainian distribution operators called Olli Herterich, which was causing power outages during the winter. Good thing, power outages lasted only for like something between 2 and 4 hours. The way more dangerous attack was 2016. There they firstly deployed their crash override malware, also called Indestroyer by other companies, against Ukrainian transmission substations, which actually affected an incredible amount. What was good and why did it have no impact? The good thing is they used a lot of information from the December 2015 attack, and in crash override we found hard-coded IP addresses. Good thing is they had a typo in them. That's why crash override did not much impact. Crash override had the potential to really disrupt the Ukrainian power grid for long term. They did a second attempt on that actually more than 2, but between 2022 and 2025, they deployed Indestroyer 2, which is like a second version of crash override, specifically focusing on the IEC 104 protocol. So crash had multiple modules like the 101, the 104, 61850, and so on. Indestroyer 2 really focused on IEC 104. Also not really much impact, more like a bit of a training, refining the tool. Just saying, and that's basically for all of our electric customers, 90% of them still would not detect the Electrum style attack. That is a very important thing. I'm not sure how it is in Estonia right now. I can just, from my personal experience, I'm working together with a lot of utility providers in Germany, and of course, like Switzerland and Austria. Thing is, a lot of these companies do not look at already existing attacks. They're building a cybersecurity posture based on buzzwords like zero trust or need to know or whatever. If you look at the actual attacks that happened, this is a way more effective way of, well, securing your network. In the end, like I said, the official numbers from our Dragos customers is 90% still can't do Electrum style attacks, which is a bit alarming for me. Going to OIXIO. OIXIO, you might also know them as Cyber Avengers, which is one of their hacktivist personas. Most important thing you need to know is they are specifically targeting internet-focused SSH. And we have seen them more and more go to stage 2, so OT impact attacks. And first of all, Cyber Avengers, when they came up, they attacked basically internet exposed HMIs, put nice wallpapers on them and stuff. Not much, well, important stuff. Now they are more and more going for the actual OT systems and the actual automation systems. So overall, one thing is important. If we look at our incident response cases, well, 30% of our incident response cases are like, hey, something is wrong. Thing is, if you don't have monitoring, it's just that. The first thing we always have to find out, is it a cyber incident, or is it just a misconfiguration or something wrong with the machine itself, which is not related to cyber. Secondly, 82% of our customers have no real criteria or process to trigger a cyber investigation. So just a simple thing like if this, then that, they fully lack this process. So please also think about, when do we involve maybe external sources, maybe some hunters, maybe internal cyber guys. Just think of when and where to do that. Next thing on the list, just two things I would love you to know about. First is Genovide's Pipe Dream. Pipe Dream is now, we discovered them back in 2022. It's still the first scalable and cross-industry attack toolkit. We discovered it, or let's say it better, we got it from a nation state government, from a government, basically one of the agencies with the 3-letter words, and did reverse engineering on that. What we found out is that this toolkit, which is basically a Metasploit for OT, can execute 46% of MITRE attack techniques. It has basically 5 modules. Dust Tunnel Lazy Cargo is basically IT for the IT. Mousehole is for OPC-UA, and Evil Scholar and Bad Omen are actually targeting Schneider and Omron devices. What is the problem with that? They are exploiting Codesys devices, and well, Codesys is used by thousands and thousands of devices all over the world. And this is not like a vulnerability you can patch. This is like a native protocol. You can just change it. It will never be changed. So that's also something that we have a very extensive report about that at dragos.com. We have open for the public, so it's worth taking a look at this. Second thing is FrostyGoop. FrostyGoop is a malware that was used in the Ukraine to put out the central heating in, you see it on the slide, 600 apartment buildings. What they basically did in this attack was they used a vulnerability in a MikroTik router, which is also one of the small office, home office routers. Did some downgrades to shut down the monitoring of that, and then directly interacted with Modbus TCP 502 and changed the translation matrix between the heating sensor and the controller. So basically what happened was the controller saw that the temperature which was sent from the sensor is like 30 degrees outside. So it automatically, based on the control loop, shut down the heating. Problem is, it was mid-January, and therefore it was minus 16 degrees outside. If you are familiar with Shodan, which is like a Google for open ports in the internet, and you look at open Modbus communication, you find 46,000 devices communicating directly over the internet via Modbus. Check that you're not one of them, please. We've seen that more and more increasing. Groups, especially hacktivist groups, targeting Modbus directly, or open or internet internet protocols openly. These kind of OT protocols directly connected to the internet. Activism. Just saying, traditional activism, website defacements, false claims, very unsophisticated DDoS attacks, not very dangerous. Nothing your OT would worry about. The problem is with the conflicts all over the world that shifted a bit. So you have seen here a lot of OT, I would say, capable hacktivist groups. Cyber Avengers is, I think, the most prominent one. They are acting in a certain conflict on a certain side. Sometimes, of course, they also shift. The Anonymous Sudan and Killnet, which is like assigned to Russia, they are pretty much jumping all over the places here. Why are hacktivists dangerous? Hacktivists do not operate within political borders. So since they are kind of a rogue group, they can basically do whatever they want. The problem is we've seen that a lot of these hacktivist groups are, well, actually connected to state actor groups. How could we tell that? They're using shared infrastructure, they share intelligence, the victims do overlap, and sometimes even the one-on-one tool is the same that the state actor uses. So you can see we have confirmed connections between Cyber Army of Russia Reborn, Killnet, the Solnsepak we saw earlier, to Electrum, and of course the other groups like Graphite and Denalloy and so on also kind of use the persona of the Cyber Army Russia Reborn to do this kind of hacktivist attacks. Last but not least, of course, ransomware. I mean, ransomware has been a threat for multiple years, very often in the IT, but more and more in the OT. If we look at the ransomware per sector, the ransomware attacks per sector, we see the most targeted environment still is manufacturing. Why is it manufacturing? Well, pretty easy. It's not that the adversaries just hate manufacturing companies. It's because manufacturing was the first sector that aimed for digitalization, because of course manufacturing needs to be profitable, the margins need to increase, and so on and so on. So the whole automation, digitalization stuff really is another level in the manufacturing space if you compare it to electric, for example. A trend we observed is that between the access and the ransomware deployment, you have an average of 5 days, which is much faster than it was in the past. Still, there's enough time to detect and respond before the ransomware is deployed. Like I said, all about monitoring your OT networks as well. And this will be basically the last slide before we go to the Q&A. I love to talk about that because that's what I see on a day-to-day basis. Ransomware is often considered as an IT problem. So it only hits Windows systems. We don't care in the OT. That is just plain wrong. A lot of devices in the OT work on Windows systems, just engineering workstations, HMIs, historians. A lot of these things are very important for your operational process. They are running Windows, and if they are hit by ransomware, it is more dangerous than in the IT, in my view. Why? Because very often you buy a machine from a machine vendor, you just use that machine, it gets compromised via ransomware. Very often I see customers having no backups of these machines, specifically the machines that are directly attached to the OTs, like HMIs, for example. And sometimes the machine vendor is no longer in business. It's very hard to get an OT back up and running if all of your devices in the OT are encrypted. We're talking about project files that are on the workstations. We're talking about historians, the whole HMI stuff. So please, please, please consider ransomware also as an OT problem. And of course, do the necessary, I would say, backup strategies to do a quick restore if it hits you. Basically, that's it for me. I would open for a Q&A. I think we have some questions already in the chat.
I haven't seen any questions yet, but feel free to
feel free
to drop them. In the meantime, Dragos is coming to our Inspiration Day, and you'll be able to meet Olli there, and you can have a chat about your challenges and in person. And they will have a session about 5 critical controls to boost your OT security posture. You can register for that. The slides will also be available afterwards in the recording. If maybe I will ask you a couple of questions. Are the threats that are facing Europe different from those that are the United States?
Typically not. When you look at the geopolitical conflicts, it's not that in a lot of conflicts we are that much different than the US. We've seen some Iranian hacktivist groups now, well, more and more, of course, targeting the US, and not very active in Europe, but that might shift. I mean, basically, if we as Europeans are going into the Strait of Hormuz, that will shift very, very, very quick.
Right. Also, are there systems that you would classify as OT that people often don't think about? Maybe they don't. Maybe they're thinking, "Oh, I don't have any OT systems," but perhaps there are some hidden ones.
I have a real life example of that. A printer. A printer, if it just prints out reports, whatever, for me, it's an IT device. If this printer prints shipping labels, and without this printer, you don't get basically labels on your manufactured goods, this will disrupt the OT process, because then you no longer can ship stuff out, and it's piling up. And we had that actually at an incident where the label printing printer and of course the workstation as well was encrypted by ransomware, and they couldn't restore it. At least not very fast. So the stuff piled up, and they shut down production because of basically a printer.
Those often don't have any backups or anything.
No, that's one of the biggest problems we had with a few ransomware attacks in the OT. Like I said, that was a machine that was bought by one vendor. The vendor did the maintenance and everything. Vendor went out of business. They did not make a backup of that. The machine was encrypted. It was impossible to restore that machine. So you throw away the whole machine basically, or at least the automation part of the machine, and build it from scratch. And that can be very expensive, depending on the machine.
Yeah. You do incident response and work with different systems. Was there a time where you felt like that surprised you? It made you rethink OT risk?
being 15 years in that business, I think nothing surprises me anymore. I'm still surprised sometimes how good IT security is and how bad, on the other hand, the OT security is. Especially if we're talking about critical infrastructure. So water, wastewater, very important things. Nobody, I think no company in Germany already invested much money in their OT security. I mean, hey, that's stuff we're relying on a daily basis.
Right.
Electric is really increasing. So in the electric space, they do a lot of investments in security. Water, wastewater is still a bit neglected. Yeah, that's I would say what surprises me most.
That's true. I have now a couple of questions from Q&A. So Darby has asked, do you have any examples of recent attacks on air-gapped OT systems?
Two things regarding that. I have one I cannot talk about, or I'm not allowed to talk about. Secondly, what is air gap? When I come to customer sites, I always hear, OT is air gapped. I was like, this NTP is in the IT. Yeah, but the rest is air gapped. It's like, hey, air gap for me is no physical connection. Full stop. If there is any kind of logic connection and you're using stuff from the IT network, it's not air gapped. What I can say is, of course, we saw that with Stuxnet, which was used in air gapped systems, using USB drives, using infected devices, or using USB drives. Then they infected the devices and checked for like the OT software on them, and if so, they released the payload and actually the impact. Of course, attacks similar to that are happening, or are, well, not impacted, but attacks are like this are happening with no impact currently, luckily.
Yeah, thanks. And then from Ray, can you give an example of how the transport sector is being hit? Do they stay and monitor and abuse info, encrypt ransomware for a quick buck?
Okay, can you repeat, please?
Yeah. So can you give an example of how the transport sector is being hit?
Yeah. Yes. For example, we had an incident at a German railway company. Happened exactly at the same time where we agreed to ship tanks to the Ukraine. They were attacked, basically trying to infiltrate and shut down the control center for the rail. That was, of course, from a attribution side, pretty sure Russian state actor, targeting that to, well, delay the shipment of the tanks because they were all transported via rail. We've seen other attacks. There's actually currently an incident in Europe on the railway system where we're investigating. But yeah, maybe hit me up with a beer on the OIXIO event, and then I can tell you more about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Olli, for your time and your expertise and sharing it with us. Everybody else, thank you for joining us today. You're very welcome to come to our Inspiration Day and continue the discussions there, or reach out if you need help with anything. And have a nice rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Stay safe.